Considered to be one of Pixar's greatest masterpieces, Up tells a story that we all fantasized about doing as a kid, tying a bunch of balloons to something really heavy to make it float. And in this case, as is widely known, Carl Fredricksen manages to do it to his whole house. However, what the movie glosses over is how impractical it would be to actually attempt this in real life, as the amount of balloons actually needed to lift an entire house and keep it in the air would be a lot more than what is actually shown. And that's in addition to many other logistical problems that are conveniently ignored or swept under the rug. Now, the reason Pixar went this route when telling the story is because, according to the director, they opted to go with what was believable rather than what was realistic. In other words, they went with what they knew the audience would accept as being possible, rather than sticking firmly to how the logistics of such a plot would actually play out in real life. And today, I'd like to go over why I believe this to not only be the correct approach to a movie like this, but one that I believe more movies these days should follow as well. And there will be minor spoilers ahead for the movie Up, so if you haven't seen it and you don't want it ruined, you should probably click off this video. This will be the only warning I'll be giving out. Okay. So to start off as simply as possible, theoretically, if enough balloons were tied to a house, it could be lifted up in the air and fly, just like in the movie. It's extremely unlikely it would go as smoothly as it does in the film, but the point is that it is theoretically possible. The biggest problem, however, is that the amount of balloons shown tied to the house would never be able to get it off the ground in real life. Because according to the Pixar team, the amount of balloons needed to actually lift a house approximately the size and weight of the one shown in the movie would be 26.5 million balloons. But because it would have been, frankly, impossible to animate that many balloons, let alone figure out how they would be able to pull off certain scenes regarding the house and balloons, they instead ended up only animating 10,297 balloons in total. Now, the reason this works is mainly because the human mind has a really hard time calculating large numbers. For example, if most people were told to imagine 100 balloons, their mental picture would probably be a lot closer to 30 or 40 balloons. So if most people were asked if the amount of balloons shown in the movie would actually be able to lift up a house, they'd probably either say yes, or that they only slightly downplayed how many it would actually take, never having any idea how much they really cut it down. So my point here is, only an expert would know just by looking at it that the amount of balloons shown would never be able to actually lift a house of that size. And because most of the audience is either kids or are an expert in this field, and once again, by human nature have a hard time comprehending large numbers, what's shown isn't out of the realm of possibility for them. And this extends to other things shown in the movie as well. For example, Carl is shown to be able to steer the house just by putting out a couple of makeshift sails and turning his weather vane in whatever direction he wants to go. Now that does seem simple enough, except for the fact that in real life, the house would need some kind of engine propelling it in order for him to be able to steer it with any kind of accuracy. Because frankly, a small weather vane would never be able to influence the direction of a house that size. He'd need a giant rudder on it, probably at least as big as the house, if not even bigger, to achieve anything close to what's depicted there. And one scene that's particularly egregious when it comes to the logistics behind this is when he tries to steer them away from the storm, fighting the wind all the while, and loses only after the wind blows the sails from the opposite direction. Again, without an engine, he never would have been able to put up resistance like that in real life. And there are, of course, many other things that the movie wouldn't exactly pass a physics test on, but in the end, it doesn't really matter because what's shown on screen is believable enough for the audience to accept it. Sure, if they thought about it hard enough, they might realize that he'd need more balloons than that to lift the house, or that his ability to steer is a bit questionable, but in the heat of the moment, it's all stuff that the audience will gladly accept. Because again, it's not like what they're showing is beyond the audience's suspension of disbelief. It's not like he got the house floating by tying a single balloon to it and then steers it by sticking his hands out like a driver from the 1950s. The people behind this put in the effort to at least make what was being presented believable so that the audience would go along with what they're seeing. Because this is widely well known, what people believe to be realistic and what is and isn't actually possible are two very different things, and Pixar took full advantage of that when making this movie. And honestly, it's a better film because of that. After all, it's about an old man who ties a bunch of balloons to his house in order to transport it next to a waterfall in South America. Does it really need to be 100% realistic? And that's what a lot of other movies don't seem to understand these days that Up did. That sometimes it's better to just go with what the audience will believe rather than what is totally realistic in a given situation, especially if the movie will benefit from it being done that way. And note that this doesn't just apply to physics either, but really anything that has a difference between what people will believe versus what the realistic outcome would be. And this is even more so the case in fantasy and science fiction movies. After all, the audience is already going to suspend their disbelief, so why do minor elements have to be so dead accurate to real life all the time? Monsters don't exist, aliens don't exist, as far as we know, fairies and other mythical creatures don't exist, superheroes and supervillains don't exist. So why do writers these days always insist that everything not having to do with those fictional elements directly be completely 100% realistic? I mean, the audience already knows that the story being told isn't real anyway, so why shouldn't it deviate from reality as much as it needs to, as long as it stays reasonably within the realm of possibility? And even as far as more grounded or realistic movies go, if it suits the movie to go slightly away from reality but still be believable, then why shouldn't it do it? I mean, it is a fictional story that is being told, so if being slightly unrealistic makes that story better, then the writers shouldn't be so afraid to make it like that. As I touched on in another video, which you can find a link in the description to, Shakespeare wasn't afraid to do it. Other authors of classic literature weren't afraid to do it. And many writers during the golden age of Hollywood weren't afraid to do it. So if you ask me, the writers of today shouldn't be afraid to either. Though, to be fair, Pixar has been pretty well known over the years for not letting reality get in the way of their stories. So it seems that they understood this better than most. The only problem is that sometimes they take it too far in the other direction, to the point that certain things don't make sense, specifically because they deviate too much from reality without a proper explanation for what exactly it is they're putting in its place. Now, please do note that I'm not saying writers should play fast and loose with reality just for the heck of it, or that a story is always better if it goes for a more believable approach than a realistic one. All I'm saying is that writers shouldn't be so afraid to deviate from reality if it works for the story and benefits it to do it that way, as movies do sometimes benefit from not adhering strictly to how things would play out in real life, especially ones that have no basis in reality to begin with. In the end, all I'm saying is that sometimes writers have got to put the story ahead of what's realistic, and the people behind Up did an excellent job at that. Again, the logistics of the house and how it works are not in any way realistic, but it's still believable enough to work within the context of the movie, and it does ultimately benefit from taking the approach that it does. Because reality can often be really constraining in what is and isn't possible. So why should it also be allowed to limit the prospects of a fictional story where anything can theoretically happen? Okay, I think that was everything I wanted to cover. So now I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you believe that more movies these days should take Up's approach of being more believable than realistic if it benefits the story to do so? Or do you believe it's better when they stay as close to reality as possible? Please let me know in the comments below. And as always, you don't have to agree with any opinions expressed in this video. You are just as entitled to your thoughts on any topic discussed here as anybody else. And thank you all for watching. It is all very greatly appreciated. And I hope to see you all next time.